So I will go into how Oppenheimer is an INTJ, most likely, according to my assessment. I am typing people, I am coaching people based on their personality types, and you can find this information on my website, typevolution.com/services. And you can also find my other typings of celebrities and some fictional characters on viptypology.wordpress.com. So now let's just go into the typing, shall we? I would like to start off with my quote-unquote purpose role for INTJ. I came up with a purpose role for this type, meaning a role that this type is supposed to fulfill in our society here on this Earth, other planets. Let's see how that goes. So INTJ is the futurist, and this is what I've written about this type. The futurists will be in their natural element when they engage in projects and pastimes that require futuristic thinking to deepen their insights, evade losses, and anticipate a personally significant future aim. So I think this is exactly what Oppenheimer did. By the way, I am not typing people just on their purpose role, especially with people who don't really know what their purpose is. They often will try out different quote-unquote purpose roles. But if the person, especially with certain celebrities, when it's very obvious what it is, it can be a good little indicator. I made a little poll on my Instagram and I asked you guys on there, like, what is Oppenheimer's type? Most people did vote INTJ, and I agree with that. But some of you thought INTP could be a possibility as well. Both types are very, very similar. They have identical, you could say, strengths and weaknesses. They just have a different order of functions and a different order of which functions they value. And this is also called quasi-identicals. They are quasi-identicals. I talked more about the concept of quasi-identicals in my previous Barbie video of ESFJ versus ESFP with Barbie and Ken. So the theorist is in their natural element when they are able to theorize and analyze abstract topics and phenomena from the perspective of dispelling logical errors and fine-tuning existing theories with their new innovative ideas, creating new and accurate theories and/or models of understanding. So you see, especially when we are dealing with scientists or physicists, this could seem to apply to a lot of them. And yes, it is true that a lot of physicists or scientists are probably INTP. However, just because someone superficially might fit this purpose role description of theorist does not mean they are actually a theorist. So a theorist, INTP, is not applicable to all scientists, basically. I do think Einstein was actually a good example of an INTP, not an ENTP. Some people believe that he's an ENTP. You can kind of argue for it all, but I would veer towards saying he was an INTP. And actually, his interaction with Oppenheimer in the movie was also quite interesting. They had also kind of opposing perspectives and attitudes towards the Manhattan Project. So the main difference here is between INTP and INTJ. They both technically can fulfill each other's purpose roles because they have the same strengths and weaknesses. However, purpose role does not just mean something you can do, it is also something you quote-unquote like to do and that you are driven to do. There is almost like an instinctual quality to it. So with INTJ and the futurist, the focus is specifically on a future aim, on the future time in the real world. So it's a lot more about actual application in the real tangible world. Even though an INTJ, especially an INTJ physicist or scientist like Oppenheimer, is quite quote-unquote abstract and not really that physically embodied, still there's a lot of focus on actually doing something in the real world, accomplishing a certain tangible future aim, as I described in the futurist purpose role. With an INTP, the theorist, someone who has introverted thinking, extroverted intuition as the first two functions, that is a very abstract view as well, but it is much more removed from tangible reality, much more tied to understanding concepts rather than actually using those concepts in order to create something like, let's say, an atom bomb that will destroy certain things in the world. You see the difference. Extroverted intuition just looks at, okay, what are the ideas, concepts we have here? Introverted thinking likes to just explain them, understand them, build theories around them. Those are like the different attitudes here. And like I said, an INTJ or an INTP, they both can do each other's purpose role. They might even be quite successful at it. Of course, Oppenheimer himself also dealt with theories and tried to refine them. The difference is really that one of these things is just more suitable to their entire personality and their personal values. That really makes the difference. And that's also why Einstein is such a great example of someone who's a theorist, an INTP who really fulfilled their purpose role, and Oppenheimer, who tragically but also did fulfill his purpose. Your purpose, when you fulfill it, it's not always necessarily gonna be positive, unfortunately. People can fulfill their purpose in a negative and a destructive way. With Oppenheimer, it's like a mix of both, positive and negative. It's light and dark. It's in the gray zone, I would say. Let's now go into the specific functions for Oppenheimer and how those functions were depicted in the movie. So introverted intuition is the first function for Oppenheimer, and it's really nicely demonstrated right in the beginning. Oppenheimer's internal visuality, where he is imagining. Honestly, I'm very bad at physics, so I don't exactly know what he was imagining. I'm just gonna blend in some footage here. But basically, I think he was imagining the interactions between atoms and other aspects in the universe. And that is really, a lot of that is introverted intuition. It's imagining something that is abstract, that isn't actually physically there and never has been there in his physical, tangible experience. So it is not necessarily a memory. It is not something you are seeing right now. It is intuition, and it is tied to him and his own understanding. This is part of being a thinking type and an introvert at the same time. INTJs, like I said, they have technically the same strengths as INTP, so INTJs also have strong introverted thinking. So he's combining that in his mind. So that's like the first thing you see. Introverted intuition is, like I said, a dynamic function. It is a function that tends to often be quite visual, believe it or not. It might be due to the connection to extroverted sensing, valuing that. It's like the other side of the coin. But rather than seeing it in the real world in front of you, you are seeing it in your inner mind, right? Like the third eye, your inner mind. And it is something that is very much tied to the subject, tied to you. It's tied to him and his conceptualization, his understanding of how atoms or these scientific phenomena interact with each other. Other examples are the way how he found this allegory between the Hindu god in the text he was citing from and his own personal experience. That's also a classic introverted intuition connection when he said, "I've become the destroyer of worlds." That is just a great example of introverted intuition. The introverted intuition of INTJ specifically is INTJ minus NI, and this is also a theory from Golenko. And there the focus is a lot on evading personal losses. The focus is on basically cautionary tales, not repeating future mistakes. And that's also why I put this in the purpose role for INTJ. And in the movie, that is also shown in how Oppenheimer, at the very end of the movie, yeah, spoiler alert, the entire thing, spoiler alert, how he says that he, on some level, knew that this was going to change the world, like working on this Manhattan Project and possibly creating the atom bomb, that this was going to change the world and would probably on some level destroy the world, or that at least there was a great potential for that. And then you see like the Earth just getting destroyed by tons of atom bombs, and it's very eerie and very disturbing to see that. And yeah, and when he told it, Einstein was just not amused, obviously. So that was also a clear indicator of minus NI, or just very strong introverted intuition. Okay, so the next function is extroverted thinking, and you can see that also very well how he was basically directing the entire Manhattan Project, which requires the logical application of the theory. So theory itself oftentimes tends to be more introvert thinking based, versus applying a theory, being efficient with it, tends to be leaning a bit more towards extrovert thinking. With extrovert thinking, you tend to create like more certain processes of how you do certain things, where it can also slightly overlap with extrovert sensing sometimes. But yeah, he was basically employing his extrovert thinking when he was directing, managing the Manhattan Project. So extrovert thinking just loves data, usually loves data, loves information, a wealth of knowledge, because the introvert thinking is more focused and it's internalized. It's usually not very broad. It tends to be more specific, whereas extrovert thinking likes to go broad. Extroverted functions typically prefer going broad or wide rather than deep and focused. So because extroversion likes to be outside in the world, right? Metaphorically, outside does not always mean literally being outside of the house. You can use your extrovert functions inside your home, but usually extrovert functions do require something outside of the person, outside of themselves. As an extrovert, you tend to have a higher need for a supply of new information, if that makes sense. And with extrovert thinking, and specifically, usually a breadth of knowledge, a breadth of information, a breadth of things you can learn. And with Oppenheimer, like his very separate interests, right? Like also his interest in Sanskrit and Hindu Indian texts was very opposite, very different from him being a scientist and a physicist. So that's also a classic example. And being able to having not only those very separate and broad interests, which is also common for people who are expert intuition types, especially, they also like to do that. So it's both that and also being able to have the knowledge, right? And having a rather even almost deeper knowledge. So it's not just knowing about Sanskrit or Hindu stuff, it's actually also delving into it to a sufficient amount. So extroverted thinking people who have it as a first or second function, especially if they're very intelligent like he was, will have like almost like a lexicon, like encyclopedic kind of mind. And that was really the case for Oppenheimer as well. So the next function, the third quote-unquote tertiary function for INTJ, the futurist as well, is introverted feeling. The tertiary function, the third function, it doesn't mean it's a good one. It tends to be a function that is rather a bit weaker, simply because INTJ's strengths are intuition and thinking and introversion. And feeling and sensing are going to be the weakest points, especially when they are extroverted. So introverted feeling, it is not the weakest, but it's also not that great. And also in the case of Oppenheimer specifically, because he is, I would say, not a specific subtype, so he's the no subtype version. He doesn't lean towards introverted intuition. He doesn't lean toward extrovert thinking. He's quite in the middle. So his introverted feeling, it's neither boosted nor, how you say, like weakened. So it's right in the middle somewhere for him, and like at average levels. And later in life, he started going more into his introverted feeling when he was experiencing this dissonance between what he was doing in the Manhattan Project and his personal feelings about guilt and his personal feelings about how it felt in the end wrong to hurt those people, hurt the Japanese. And in the movie, for me, that was a quite surreal experience, which I don't really normally encounter in movies. Usually in a movie, when people are cheering, they want you to feel cheerful as well, right? So this is like a very stereotypical extrovert feeling interaction. Like, you see people cheering like yay, and you're also supposed to feel like yay, right? Or you see people crying on screen and then you're also supposed to feel like crying. That's like a very typical extroverted feeling experience between you as an audience member and the screen. But Oppenheimer reversed that, or just put it on its head. So the Americans and his fellow scientists, they all were cheering for Oppenheimer because the bomb, it worked. That was their entire goal, right? It worked and it was destructive and powerful. That was contrasted with his own internal morality, where he felt like he did something bad. And also later on, he told the president at that point that he felt like he had blood on his hands, meaning he felt like he did something bad, something wrong that he shouldn't have done. And that was clearly juxtaposed with the main mood and the main moral viewpoint that was happening around him. So this is how you can see where Fi clashes with Fe. Usually Fe tends to join in. So like I said, like Fe, when someone is crying, you cry. If someone is cheering, you tend to cheer. Like, it tends to be more of a communal, shared morality. But with Oppenheimer, the focus a lot in the movie as well was how this was at a dissonance, how there was no match up there. His personal Fi feeling, introverted feeling, was at odds with the common morality around him. And by the way, just because there is a certain moral or cultural structure does not mean that everyone who goes along with it is automatically an Fe type or extroverted feeling type. People can join in with that and be introverted feeling types as well, but it's usually, the process is usually much more quote-unquote complicated, and there are way more steps in between. Extroverted feeling types tend to join in with that much more readily, much more automatically, much more easily. People who have strong introverted feeling, especially if they value it, there's always like a conscious kind of almost like decision of, okay, am I going to join in with this? Does this align with my own personal values or not? So this was really also very well shown in the Oppenheimer movie. Last but not least, extrovert sensing. And that one is a little bit awkward to talk about because this function... Okay, so before going into the awkward bit, it is mostly shown in the way how Oppenheimer tends to be rather passive. When Louis Strauss is defaming him, basically, or he is putting him down, his wife at that point, Kitty, she is furious, and she has to keep telling Oppenheimer to fight, to do something, to go against it, to push it, not to just be the martyr and just taking it, right? And this is a common weakness for INTJs and INFJs who are weak at extrovert sensing. They often struggle with fighting. Like, it can be like stereotypical physical fighting, but it can even just be fighting in the sense of going against something, like standing up, being bold. And Kitty is very different in this respect. I'm not exactly sure what her type is, to be honest. I also couldn't find enough information to type her, but I think it's very clear, especially in the movie, that her extrovert sensing is stronger than his, that she is probably an S-type. S-types, even those that don't have extrovert sensing first or second, all of them are better at extrovert sensing just because they're S-types. And she keeps telling him to fight, to push back, to not just take it, to not just be a martyr. And she's also shown of like throwing stuff, like throwing bottles and just being very, very like aggressive with it. And yeah, INTJs and INFJs tend to be not that aggressive. They really struggle with having this kind of forceful attitude. They usually are not good at that. And also, by the way, INFP and INTP, for them it's also very hard. With ICP and ISFPs and ISFJ and ISTJ, it's also not always super obvious or super strong. It always depends on the situation. The types where it's like the most clear, the most strong, the most head-on, it's with ESFPs and ESTPs. And actually in the Barbie video that I made, Ken is an ESFP in my opinion, and ESFP and INTJ are in socioeconomics called duals, that they are opposites but complementary opposites. And Ken, if Oppenheimer had a friend like Ken, it would have been much easier for him probably to deal with these issues. So Ken is actually a good example of someone with extrovert sensing first, and is like very opposite from Oppenheimer, but still compatible with what Oppenheimer wants. Like, I think they both could have been like great friends. And okay, this is a bit not safe for work, you've been warned, but when it comes to the nude scenes, the scenes, you also can see how Oppenheimer just takes it and tends to be quite passive, and the women in his life, especially the one who he has an affair with, I think her name is Jean. In the movie, she's very much someone who kind of takes over, takes initiative, takes control over the encounters, let's say. I'm not saying that Oppenheimer never does it. There's also a scene when he just like starts, when he grabs his wife, not wife at that point, but he grabs Kitty and they kiss. INTJs can have moments of that, but overall, Jean is always on top of him, basically, without being too graphic. So I found that interesting because, of course, these scenes, they were not just gratuitous scenes like in other shows. It wasn't just about, ooh, look at that, this is so, yeah, how you say, decadent and whatever. No, but it actually showed the personality dynamic between those two characters. And I think Jean, at least how she was depicted in this movie, seemed to be also someone who has extrovert sensing, and probably someone who has extrovert sensing second. Possibly someone who's an ISFP, aka the aesthete in my system. But I'm not exactly certain of that. But at least in the movie, how it was portrayed, she definitely had more extrovert sensing than Oppenheimer, and she basically used it on him, but he enjoyed that greatly. And he kept pursuing her over that, like, for not necessarily just for that, but it was an interesting dynamic that you can see there. And the entire mystery around Oppenheimer is that did he know what he was doing, or was he just in denial of it? I'm not an expert on the Oppenheimer subject, but I would venture out to say possibly on some level he knew. At the very least, he knew the latent potential that this could be very destructive and harm the world. And he was in some respect in denial of it, and also because Introverted Feeling, the ethical function, is not high in his type, it's lower, right? He was mainly focusing on Introverted Intuition and Extroverted Thinking and just accomplishing the future goal and making it happen and fulfilling his purpose, rather than thinking about, okay, how might this actually impact people, right? So there was the disconnect. He was just so focused on the technicalities and the logic that he kind of missed sight on the ethical part of it, and he wished and expected to be able to let other people deal with the ethical aspects. And actually that is normal for T-types. T-types, that is not their purpose in this world necessarily. That's why we have F-types to complement them. It is true actually that F-types are supposed to take over this aspect. However, just at that time, Oppenheimer was not surrounded by the right kinds of F-types, not the right kinds of FI types, who also didn't have enough of the power and didn't have the right mentality at that time. So yeah, he couldn't just rely on someone to take over the ethical aspect and make it good, or fine. So that's how the whole Japanese Hiroshima issue unfortunately happened. So yeah, that is the tragedy of his entire line of work. And that's what happens, like I said, when we don't have complementary types in our lives who also are mentally healthy enough and have good intentions. So I do think that probably at least Jean was an F-type. She did have very strong convictions, and especially when it came to communism. But she was very mentally unhealthy, and at the end it was no help for him. I'm not exactly sure what Kitty's type was, but she could have been an F-type. I'm not exactly certain. But she was also very mentally unhealthy, so that also didn't help. And most scientists, the vast majority of scientists, especially when it comes to the higher levels of physics, are going to be T-types. And they all won't have the natural proficiency at ethics, feeling. And they won't have this natural focus on it. So that's kind of a tragedy. And the movie at the end also makes very clear, like, this is a cautionary tale. We have these atom bombs and we need to think about the future of technology, and also, of course, already including the things we have, like weapons, how technologies and logic could be faster than the ethics, right? And we kind of need to bring both into some sort of balance or harmony in order to find balance and harmony in our human society. We do need the F to catch up with the T. And I think this is actually what Christopher Nolan on some level is trying to communicate. Alright, let me know what you think of this video and what topic you would like me to cover next. And if you want me to type you or coach you based on your personality type, like I said, go to typevolution.com/services, scroll down to the bottom and fill out the right form, and we will see what we can do together. Alright, have a good day and see you in the next video. Bye!